When the lawyer said my parents had transferred every single thing, our house, their savings, even Dad's old truck, to my sister, I thought it was a sick joke. But it wasn't. I sat there, staring at the man in the gray suit as he shuffled the papers on his desk like this was just another Tuesday. My mother avoided my eyes, and my father kept clearing his throat, like that would make the tension disappear. Marissa, on the other hand, was smiling. That smug little smile she always had when she got her way. For a moment, I couldn't even process the words. Everything? I had spent years helping them pay their bills, fixing up the old house, taking Mom to her appointments, managing Dad's medication schedules. Marissa hadn't even visited for Thanksgiving the past 2 years. But there she sat, perfectly dressed, her red nails tapping on the table, acting like she'd earned this. Why? The word came out shaky. Why would you do this? My mother's voice was firm, almost rehearsed. You already have a stable life, Lydia. A good job, your own apartment. Marissa's had it harder. She needs help getting back on her feet. That sentence hit me like a slap. Harder? My sister had spent her 20s chasing men and burning through credit cards. I had been the one cleaning up after her messes, covering for her when she couldn't pay rent, lying to our parents about her new business ideas. Marissa leaned back in her chair and gave me that fake sympathetic look. Come on, Whitey. You know this doesn't change anything between us. It changed everything. I looked at my parents, the people who taught me to work hard, to be honest, to take care of family, and realized I didn't know them anymore. My father finally met my eyes, but he didn't speak. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe deep down he knew this was wrong, but didn't have the courage to say it. When the lawyer asked me to sign a few acknowledgement papers, my hands felt numb. My chest ached like I'd swallowed something sharp. I signed my name because I couldn't think of what else to do. The air in that office was thick, heavy with something final. As I walked out, I could hear Marissa laughing softly behind me. My mother told her to stop, but it was too late. That sound would stay with me forever. Her laughter as I lost everything I thought was mine. Outside, the cold air hit my face, but it didn't clear the fog in my head. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house I grew up in. Every memory, birthdays, late-night talks, movie nights, now belonged to someone else. To her. I thought about driving back and demanding answers, but what was the point? They'd made their choice. And that day, I decided something too. I would never beg for love that had to be earned with sacrifice. If they wanted to give her everything, they could. I would take the one thing they never expected me to have: control over what happened next. The days after that meeting felt unreal. I went to work, made coffee, answered emails, smiled when people spoke to me, but I was moving through fog. Every little thing reminded me of what happened. The world kept turning, but mine had stopped. I kept checking my phone, hoping my parents would call, that maybe they'd realized how wrong it all was. They never did. It was like I'd vanished from their lives overnight. I kept telling myself I didn't need their money or their house. I had my own life, my own place, and I'd worked for everything I had. But deep down, it wasn't about any of that. It was about feeling like I didn't matter to them. Like all the years I'd spent taking care of them meant nothing. Every time I thought about my mom saying Marissa needed it more, it felt like someone twisting a knife. At work, I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting. I'd stare at my computer screen, and suddenly I'd be back in that lawyer's office, hearing those same words again. My coworkers must have noticed how distracted I was, but I didn't want to talk about it. What could I even say? My parents gave my whole life to someone else. Jacob, my best friend, was the only one I couldn't fool. He's known me long enough to see through every fake smile. One afternoon, he found me sitting alone in the break room, pretending to read emails. He slid a coffee toward me and said, "You've been off lately. Want to tell me what's going on?" At first, I didn't want to. Talking about it made it too real. But once I started, I couldn't stop. I told him everything: the lawyer, the papers, Marissa's smirk, my parents' silence. He didn't interrupt, just listened, his face calm but serious. When I finished, he said softly, "You've done everything for them, LYD. You don't deserve this." I nodded, but his words didn't make me feel better. They just reminded me how helpless I felt. I wanted to cry, but I was too tired for tears. I'd already spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, asking myself what I did wrong. At home, I tried keeping busy. I cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. I rearranged furniture just to exhaust myself enough to sleep. Still, the moment I closed my eyes, I'd see Marissa's smile and my mother's cold expression. It burned in my mind, like a scar that refused to fade. I thought about calling again, just to hear their voices. My hand would hover over my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wasn't going to beg for their attention. They made their choice. The hurt didn't fade, it hardened. It turned into something sharp and steady. I stopped expecting an apology or an explanation. I stopped trying to fix it. A quiet kind of determination started growing in me instead, not out of hate, but out of survival. If they had chosen her over me, fine. But one day, they would see exactly what that choice cost them. A few weeks later, I drove through my old neighborhood, something I hadn't done since that day at the lawyer's office. I told myself it was just a shortcut, but that was a lie. Some part of me wanted to see the house again, to remind myself it was still there, that my whole childhood hadn't just disappeared. When I turned the corner and saw it, my stomach tightened. The place didn't look like home anymore. Fresh paint covered the porch, new lights hung from the trees, and a group of people stood in the yard with drinks in their hands. Laughter and music filled the air. Then I saw her, Marissa, standing on the deck like a queen showing off her new castle. It was my parents' anniversary weekend. I wondered if she even remembered. I parked across the street and watched for a moment. The old mailbox I used to paint with Dad was gone. The rose bushes I planted with Mom had been replaced by expensive landscaping. Everything looked perfect and completely empty of any meaning. I should have driven away, but I couldn't. Curiosity or anger, maybe both, made me cross the street. I slipped through the gate quietly, unnoticed at first. The music was so loud it made the ground shake. People were dancing by the pool that used to be our garden. Someone had turned my childhood home into a backdrop for a show. When Marissa finally noticed me, she froze for a second, then smiled like nothing was wrong. "Lydia, you made it," she said, waving me over like I was a guest. "I wasn't invited," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. She laughed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just a small get-together." Behind her, through the open patio doors, I saw it, my grandmother's piano. The one she played every Sunday, the one she promised would be mine someday. It sat gleaming in the corner of the living room, surrounded by people setting their drinks on it like it was a table. I felt something twist inside me. "Why is that here?" I asked, pointing to it. Marissa shrugged. "It was in the storage room. I figured someone should actually use it. You don't even play anymore, right?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. I remembered sitting beside Grandma, her wrinkled hands guiding mine across the keys. That piano wasn't just wood and strings, it was a piece of her. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You took everything. Even this." Marissa smiled, not kindly. "You were always the helper, Lydia. Helpers don't get rewarded, they get used." Something in me cracked. For years I had cleaned up her messes, covered for her mistakes, and believed that being good would eventually mean being valued. But standing there, hearing those words, I realized that goodness meant nothing to people like her. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked out, leaving her laughter echoing behind me. My hands were shaking as I reached my car, but my head was strangely clear. Driving away, I didn't look back at the house again. It wasn't mine anymore, maybe it never had been. But as I drove down that familiar road, a new thought formed in my mind. She could keep the house, the money, the piano. I was done chasing fairness. From now on, I'd find a way to make peace on my own terms, and one day, she'd understand what losing really felt like. A month later, I got a call from an old family friend, Mrs. Turner. She was one of those people who always knew everything about everyone. At first, I thought it was just a friendly check-in, but then she said something that made my stomach drop. "Your parents' new condo downtown is beautiful," she said cheerfully. Marissa really did them a favor. For a few seconds, I couldn't even answer. "A condo? Downtown?" I knew nothing about it. I ended the call politely, but my hands were shaking. I searched online and found it within minutes, a high-rise building with glass balconies and ocean views. The price made my chest tighten. There was no way they could afford it on their own. I called my mother, trying to sound calm. "Mom, where did you get the money for that condo?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end, long enough to make me nervous. Then she said, "Marissa helped us sort things out. She's been wonderful, Lydia. You should be thankful she looks after us." Something inside me turned cold. I hung up and went digging through my old files. I wanted to confirm what I already feared. When I finally got the bank on the phone, the truth came out. My college savings account, the one my dad had opened when I was 16, had been emptied months ago. Every cent was gone. The woman from the bank explained that the transfer had been authorized by both my parents. She sounded sorry, but I barely heard her. My heart was pounding too loud. That money was supposed to be untouchable, saved for my future. Now it was gone, and they were living in luxury while I was barely getting by. I sat on my couch, staring at the wall for a long time. I wasn't angry at first, just hollow. It was like losing the last piece of proof that they'd ever believed in me. I thought about every time I'd stayed home to take care of them, every weekend I'd turned down plans to help out, every time I'd given up something for their comfort. And this was my reward. The anger came later, slow and hot. Not the kind that made me want to scream, but the kind that made me want to disappear from their world completely. I deleted their numbers from my phone, blocked Marissa, and stopped checking for messages. I didn't want to hear their excuses. When Jacob asked why I looked so tired, I just said work had been hard. I couldn't bring myself to tell him. I didn't want pity. What I wanted was control, something that had been taken from me piece by piece. That night, I sat by the window, watching cars move through the city lights, and made a quiet promise to myself. I would never ask them for anything again. Not an apology, not an explanation, not love. I would act like nothing had happened. I'd smile when needed, be polite if we crossed paths, but behind that calm surface, I'd start working on something of my own. They thought they'd taken everything from me, but they hadn't taken my mind or my will. I didn't know what my next step would be yet, but I knew this much. The next move would be mine, and they would never see it coming. One Saturday morning, I decided to clean my apartment. It wasn't really about cleaning. I just needed something to keep my mind busy. I pulled boxes from the closet, sorting through old papers, photos, and things I hadn't touched in years. Near the bottom of one box, I found a small stack of envelopes tied with a faded ribbon. My heart skipped when I saw the handwriting. It was my grandmother's. I hadn't seen her writing in so long. The letters were yellowed with age, her words written neatly in blue ink. She'd passed away years before all this, but as I sat on the floor and read her words, it felt like she was right there beside me again. Most of the letters were about small things, her garden, her favorite recipes, memories of when I used to visit her on weekends. But one envelope was different. It was heavier and taped shut. On the front, she had written in careful script, "For the one who truly cared." I opened it with shaky hands. Inside was a small key and a short note that read, "If you are reading this, it means I'm gone. Take this to Oakwood Bank. You'll know what to do." I stared at the key for a long time. My grandmother was never one for mysteries, but I trusted her completely. The next day, I drove to the bank she mentioned. The clerk looked surprised when I handed over the key, but led me to a private room. Inside the small metal box was a folder full of documents, official papers, her handwriting on sticky notes, and a copy of her will. My throat tightened as I read. She had left certain assets, modest but meaningful, in my name. Among them was a small lakeside property in the northern part of the state. I had never heard about it. There was also a letter for me. She wrote that she had chosen to leave it to me because she knew I would take care of it, not waste it. She ended with, "You always gave without asking. This is my way of giving something back." Tears filled my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt something warm. Not joy exactly, but recognition. Someone had seen me for who I was, and it meant everything. I drove out to the property a few days later. The cabin was small, quiet, surrounded by trees and the sound of water. It wasn't fancy, but it felt safe, untouched by all the chaos that had filled my life. Standing there, I realized this place was mine, something no one could take. It wasn't about value or ownership. It was about what it represented, honesty, love, and something real. As I walked along the lake's edge, an idea began to form in my mind. I wasn't going to steal anything back or destroy anyone's life. I didn't need revenge in the way they'd expect. But I wanted them to see what their choices had done, to face the emptiness they'd created for themselves. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I felt a quiet strength growing inside me. My grandmother had left me more than a property. She'd left me direction. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt ready to use it. The cabin stood at the edge of the lake, half hidden by trees, silent and lonely. The roof had patches of moss, and the wooden steps creaked under my feet. The air smelled of pine and rain. I unlocked the door, and it swung open with a low groan. Dust hung in the air like fog, but underneath it all, I could still feel the life my grandmother once filled this place with. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls needed work, the floorboards were weak, and the windows let in the cold wind. Still, I didn't see a broken cabin. I saw a project, something to pour myself into. Something that would remind me I still had control over my own world. I began spending every weekend there. I repaired what I could, learning through trial and error. I painted the walls, replaced broken panels, sanded the old porch. Each swing of the hammer felt like a release. Every coat of paint quieted the noise in my head. I didn't need anyone's approval here. The silence was kind. One afternoon, while taking a break, I sat by the lake and opened my laptop. Out of habit, I started browsing news about local businesses. That's when I came across something familiar. My father's old company, now run by Marissa. There was a short article about her new leadership, praising her bold financial decisions. My stomach tightened. I clicked deeper, searching through records, reports, and filings. Some of the numbers didn't make sense. Certain accounts were missing, and others looked altered. I remembered enough from the years I helped my dad with paperwork to see that something was off. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Marissa was moving money around, hiding income, avoiding taxes. She wasn't just careless, she was doing it intentionally. At first, I closed the laptop, trying to ignore it. But then I thought about everything she had taken. Not just the house or the money, but the way she had turned our parents against me. She had stolen their trust, and now she was staining our father's name with her greed. The next day, I went back to town and started collecting documents. Bank statements, business filings, property records, anything I could find. I wasn't planning revenge. I told myself I was just keeping proof, just in case. But deep down, I knew I was preparing for something more. The cabin became my base. During the day, I worked on repairs, and at night, I spread papers across the kitchen table, highlighting details, cross-checking numbers. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Marissa had built her success on lies, and she had pulled my parents right along with her. Each piece of evidence I gathered made my anger sharper, but also steadier. I wasn't emotional anymore. I was focused, careful, strategic. When I looked around the finished room one evening, the walls glowing in warm light, the floor smooth under my feet, I realized the cabin wasn't just being rebuilt. I didn't know when or how, but I knew one day this place would be the center of everything. Not for destruction, but for truth. The setup was coming together quietly, piece by piece. And when it was complete, Marissa wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. By the time the cabin was finished, months had passed. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, the floor shone like new, and the air smelled of pine and candle wax. Everything looked warm and calm, just the way I wanted it. From the outside, it seemed like I had found peace, but inside, I had built something else, a stage for truth. I wrote a short message to my parents, inviting them to dinner at the cabin. I kept the tone soft and polite, saying I wanted to make things right. I didn't mention Marissa, but I knew they would bring her. I could almost hear my mother's voice in my head. Families should forgive each other. That was exactly what I wanted her to think. The night of the dinner, I set the table carefully. A simple meal, a few candles, soft music playing in the background. The place looked almost magical in the warm light. When I heard the sound of tires on gravel, my chest tightened. Marissa arrived first, stepping out of her shiny new car in a dress that looked expensive enough to pay a month's rent. My parents followed, both smiling as if nothing bad had ever happened between us. I greeted them with a calm smile, pretending I didn't notice the way Marissa looked around, assessing everything like she was appraising property. "It's beautiful, Lydia," my mother said, walking inside. "You've done a lovely job." "Thank you," I said softly. "It feels good to make something on my own." We sat down for dinner. For a while, everything was polite, small talk, nervous laughter, questions about work and weather. I let them enjoy the meal, waited until the plates were empty and the silence began to stretch. Then I stood up and walked to the counter, where I had placed 3 folders. I set one in front of each of them. "I have something to show you," I said. My father looked confused. My mother smiled uncertainly. Marissa raised an eyebrow, probably expecting some sentimental letter. But when they opened the folders, the mood in the room changed instantly. Inside were copies of documents, bank transfers, false signatures, missing tax forms. Every line was carefully highlighted, every name clearly shown. My father's signature appeared on papers he'd never signed. My mother's name was used to authorize things she'd never seen. My father's face went pale. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Your daughter's business, I said. This is what she's built with everything you gave her. Marissa's fork clattered against her plate. You've been spying on me? She snapped, her voice trembling. No, I replied calmly. I've been watching. There's a difference. My mother's hand covered her mouth. Marissa, tell me this isn't true, she whispered. Marissa tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just sat back, letting the papers speak for me. For once, the truth wasn't hidden behind charm or excuses. Finally, I looked at them and said, This is the family you chose over me. No one answered. The candles flickered, the music played softly, and the silence felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt steady, not angry, not broken, just done. When they left that night, no one said goodbye. The only sound was Marissa's car speeding away into the dark. I stood at the door, watching the taillights fade, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. It didn't take long for the storm to start. A few days after that dinner, everything began to fall apart. The papers I had handed them had done their work. Marissa must have tried to fix things quickly, but it was too late. The truth had already slipped out. I heard about it first from a former co-worker of my father's, who called me by mistake. His voice was shaky as he said, The company's in trouble, Lydia. The IRS is all over it. I didn't ask for details. I already knew what they'd find. Marissa had been moving money around for years, and now every hidden number was under a spotlight. Within a week, news spread through town. People who used to praise my parents' smart daughter now whispered behind their backs. Old friends stopped calling. My parents had built their pride around appearances, and now that image was crumbling. The condo they were so proud of became the center of attention. Investigators froze their accounts, saying the funds came from unverified sources. My mother tried to explain, but her voice didn't carry the same authority anymore. My father, once known for his calm and dignity, avoided leaving the building altogether. Marissa's face even appeared in a local newspaper article, Business Under Investigation. I read it once quietly, and then closed the page. I didn't feel satisfaction or joy, just emptiness. Watching the truth destroy what they had built didn't bring me happiness. It only confirmed what I already knew, that greed always eats itself in the end. I stayed out of sight during all of it. I didn't answer calls, didn't talk to anyone who tried to reach me. I took long walks by the lake, watching the water shift under the wind. The quiet felt different now, heavier but peaceful. No noise, no explanations. One evening, I wrote a short note. Just a few words on plain paper. You gave everything to her. Now she can handle everything. I left it on their doorstep, folded neatly, without a name. They would know it was from me. I heard from a neighbor that my mother cried when she found it. My father didn't speak for days. Marissa stopped showing up at the company altogether. Some people said she left town. Others said she was staying in a motel under another name. I didn't care enough to find out. Everything they had transferred, every penny and piece of property, had turned into a burden. It was strange how fast the world changed. Just a few months earlier, I was the quiet, responsible daughter they ignored. Now I was the one untouched by the chaos they created. I spent my days fixing things at the cabin, small tasks that kept my hands busy and my mind calm. I didn't celebrate their downfall. That wasn't the point. What mattered was the balance, that life, in its own way, had leveled the scales. At night, I sometimes thought about calling them, just once, to see how they were. But then I'd remember that final dinner, the silence, the shock on their faces, and I knew there was nothing left to say. The family I once fought for no longer existed. What was left were lessons written in ashes and regret. And as I watched the sun set over the lake, I understood that walking away had been my real victory. The lake had changed with the seasons, and so had I. The air was cooler now, the water calm and silver in the early mornings. My days had fallen into a gentle rhythm. I woke up with the sun, made coffee, and stepped out onto the porch to listen to the birds. Life had finally slowed down to something simple and real. The cabin was no longer just a place to hide. It had become home. I'd planted a small garden out back, tomatoes, herbs, wildflowers, nothing fancy, but it made me proud. The smell of soil on my hands felt honest, like a reminder that I could still grow something good, even after everything had fallen apart. A few times a week, I drove into the nearby town to give piano lessons to children. It started when one neighbor asked if I could teach her son, and then word spread. Soon, my small living room was filled with laughter and clumsy fingers pressing keys. I found myself smiling again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The children didn't know anything about my past, and I liked it that way. They only knew me as Miss Lydia, the teacher who always had cookies on the table and let them try again when they hit the wrong note. Teaching reminded me of my grandmother, her patience, her kindness, the way she believed that music could heal quiet hurts. Maybe she had been right. One afternoon, when I came back from the garden, I noticed an envelope in the mailbox. My name was written in my mother's careful handwriting. I froze for a moment, just staring at it. I hadn't heard from her or my father since everything fell apart. I brought it inside and sat at the table, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. I opened it slowly. The first few lines were full of apologies, words like sorry, forgive, mistake. She said they hadn't understood what they were doing, that they were ashamed of how things had turned out. She asked if we could talk again, maybe start over. I stopped reading after that. My chest didn't hurt this time. I didn't cry. I just folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer beside my grandmother's note. It wasn't anger that made me stop. It was understanding. Some things, once broken, don't need fixing. As the sun began to set, I went outside and sat by the lake. The water rippled softly, reflecting the pink and gold sky. The wind moved through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, I felt light. I wasn't carrying anyone's disappointment anymore, no guilt, no need to prove anything. I thought about my family, but there was no bitterness left. Just distance, like a story that had ended long ago. I had learned to let silence do the talking. When night came, I turned off the lights, leaving the cabin in darkness except for the glow from the moon outside. I lay down, listening to the soft hum of crickets. My mind was still, my heart quiet. After years of noise, betrayal, and chaos, peace had finally found me. Not because I searched for it, but because I stopped chasing what was never meant to stay. The morning was quiet when I made my choice. The sky was clear, and the lake looked like glass. I had been thinking about it for weeks, sitting on the porch with coffee in hand, wondering what to do with everything my grandmother had left me. The cabin had healed me, but I knew it wasn't meant to keep me forever. I drove into town and met with a representative from a local children's music foundation. They worked with kids who couldn't afford lessons or instruments. As she spoke about their work, I thought of my grandmother, how she believed that music could change lives. It felt right. I told her I wanted to donate the property and everything tied to it in my grandmother's name. She looked surprised at first. "Are you sure?" she asked. I nodded, completely sure. The papers took a few weeks to finalize. I handled every detail myself, careful and steady. When the final documents were ready, I signed them without hesitation. The foundation now owned the cabin and the estate. There would be no way for my parents or Marissa to ever claim it. That part of the past was sealed for good. I didn't tell anyone what I had done. It wasn't for them to know. This was something between me, my grandmother, and the quiet peace I had built here. On my last evening at the cabin, I walked through each room slowly. The walls were still warm from the sunset. The piano sat by the window where the children used to play. I touched the keys one last time and smiled. Before leaving, I stepped outside and looked at the lake. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the smell of pine and rain. I locked the door gently and stood for a moment, my hand resting on the handle. I didn't feel sad or nostalgic, just free. Everything that had once hurt me had led me here, to this final moment of calm. As I turned to leave, I whispered to myself, some inherit wealth. Others inherit strength. And then I walked away, the sound of the lake fading behind me, knowing that for the first time in my life, I truly owned my peace. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away and letting them face the consequences? Or should I have given them another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share in the comments and subscribe for more stories.